The file was not hidden in a safe or buried beneath a floorboard. It was sitting on a desk in the provost marshal's office in occupied New Orleans, pinned beneath a heavy brass paperweight. It was November 14th, 1863. The city had been under Union control for over a year, a place of muddy streets, resentment, and the chaotic bureaucracy of occupation. Captain Julian Halloway, an auditor for the Department of the Gulf, had been sent to reconcile supply logs for the contraband camps, the refugee settlements where thousands of formerly enslaved people gathered, seeking the freedom the Union Army had promised them. Halloway was a man of numbers, a former accountant from Ohio who believed that the moral arc of the universe could be traced in a well-kept ledger. He had seen the horrors of the battlefield at Shiloh and retreated into the safety of paperwork, but the document beneath the paperweight defied his accounting. It was a standard seizure form, Form 44B, used to catalog Confederate property confiscated by Union troops. Usually, it listed bales of cotton, livestock, or barrels of sugar. This form, dated August 3, 1863, listed 19 items seized from the Cypress Grove plantation in Plaquemines Parish. But in the column for description, someone had written 19 names: Isaac, Delia, Thomas, Rose. The list went on. In the column for current location, the ink was smudged, as if the writer had hesitated. But in the final column, labeled disposition, there was a stamp in red ink: brutal and final, unrecoverable evidence. Halloway stared at the page. People were not evidence. They were refugees, laborers, or soldiers. If they were dead, the form should say deceased. If they were sold, an impossibility under Union law, it would be a crime. Unrecoverable evidence was a term reserved for lost weaponry, sunken gold, or burned documents. It implied that these 19 human beings had served a specific purpose in a legal or military process, and had been discarded when that purpose was frustrated. Halloway picked up the file. It felt light, flimsy, but as he would soon discover, it was heavy enough to drag him into the darkest corners of the Union occupation, where the line between liberator and oppressor had blurred into a terrifying shade of gray. Julian Halloway had spent 6 months in New Orleans, trying to bring order to the chaos of the Department of the Gulf. The city was a hive of corruption. Cotton speculators from the north drank with sudden friends in hotel bars. Union officers looked the other way for a price. And thousands of contrabands, the escaped slaves, died of dysentery and starvation in camps that were little better than the plantations they had fled. Halloway's office was in the Custom House, a massive granite fortress on Canal Street. The air inside was always damp, smelling of river water and old paper. When he found the file, he initially assumed it was a clerical error. A clerk had used the wrong stamp. A distracted officer had mislabeled a burial list. He took the file to the records clerk, a young corporal named Tobias Vane. Form 44B from Cypress Grove, Halloway said, placing the paper on the counter. It lists 19 people as unrecoverable evidence. What does that code mean in this context? Vane looked at the document and paled. He didn't touch it. He pulled his hand back as if the paper were hot. "That's Colonel Bragg's file, sir," Vane said quietly. "Colonel Thaddeus Bragg, the quartermaster for the Southern District." "Yes, sir, he handles the special seizures. If it's stamped unrecoverable, it means the inquiry is closed. There's no inventory to check." "I'm not asking for inventory, Corporal. I'm asking where these 19 people are. Are they dead?" Vane glanced around the busy office, lowering his voice. "I don't know, sir, but I know that when Colonel Bragg marks something as evidence, you don't go looking for it. And you certainly don't ask about the Cypress Grove confiscation. That wasn't a normal raid." Halloway felt a prickle of unease at the base of his neck. He was an auditor. His job was to ask. "Pull the supporting documents," he ordered. "The incident report for the seizure of Cypress Grove, August 1863. "There are no supporting documents, sir," Vane said, his eyes pleading with Halloway to drop it. Just that sheet. The rest was lost in transit. Lost in transit. Unrecoverable. The language of bureaucracy was being used to cover a void. Halloway took the file back to his desk. He stared at the names. Delia, age 22, Isaac, age 40, Little Sam, age 6. Evidence? Evidence of what? He decided to visit Cypress Grove. The plantation lay 30 miles downriver, a sprawling estate that had been seized by Union forces in the summer. It was now ostensibly a government-run farm, where freed people worked for wages under Treasury Department supervision. Halloway rode out on a humid Tuesday morning, the road following the levee of the Mississippi. The landscape was beautiful and rotting, Spanish moss draping the trees like funeral bunting. When he arrived at Cypress Grove, he found a scene of desolation. The main house had been gutted by fire, a blackened shell rising from the weeds. The fields were half-harvested, the cotton bolls bursting and graying in the rain. The Union officer in charge was a Lieutenant Miller, a man who looked like he hadn't slept in a week. He sat on a crate on the porch of the overseer's cottage, drinking coffee that smelled like chicory and mud. "Captain," Miller said, not rising, "if you're here about the mule feed, we still haven't got it." "I'm not here about mules," Halloway said. He produced the list of names. "I'm looking for these people. They were listed as seized property from this estate in August. Do you know them?" Miller glanced at the list and spat on the ground. "I wasn't here in August. I took command in September, but I know the names. The people in the quarters still talk about them." "Talk about them how?" "Like they're ghosts," Miller said. "They say Colonel Bragg took them, said they were witnesses." "Witnesses to what?" "To what they found in the cellar of the main house." Miller looked up, his eyes hard. "Rumor says the old master Valker hid his gold before the troops got here, buried it deep. Bragg tore this place apart looking for it. Didn't find it, but he found the house servants, 19 of them. He claimed they knew where the gold was. So he arrested them." "He detained them," Miller corrected. "Took them onto a transport boat, the Kestrel. Said he was taking them to New Orleans for interrogation. But they never arrived in New Orleans, did they? That's why you're here." "The file says unrecoverable evidence," Halloway said quietly. Miller laughed, a harsh, barking sound. "That's one way to put it. You want to know what happened, Captain? Go find the Kestrel or what's left of it, but be careful. Thaddeus Bragg is a man who turns a profit on this war, and he doesn't like people auditing his ledger." Halloway was beginning to see the shape of the crime. It wasn't about slavery, not directly. It was about greed. Bragg had been hunting gold. He believed these 19 people knew the location. He had taken them not as people but as keys to a lock. And when the lock wouldn't open, or perhaps when he was done with them, what had they become? Evidence implied they were being kept for something. Or perhaps they were the evidence of something Bragg had done, and unrecoverable was his way of ensuring they could never testify. Before we follow Captain Halloway onto the dark waters of the Mississippi to find the fate of the Kestrel and the 19 souls aboard, take a second to subscribe to our channel. Hit the bell icon so you don't miss these investigations into the history that was meant to be forgotten. And let us know in the comments, what city are you watching from right now? We want to know where our history hunters are located. Now, let's return to New Orleans, where Halloway is about to confront a colonel who viewed human beings as disposable assets. The Kestrel was a sidewheel steamer requisitioned by the Union Army for transport duties. According to the harbormaster's logs, it had been decommissioned in late August 1863, cited as unfit for service due to hull damage. It was currently moored in a salvage yard in Algiers, across the river from New Orleans. Halloway found the ship on a gray afternoon. It was listing in the mud, stripped of its engines and paddle wheel. It looked like a carcass picked clean. He boarded via a rotting gangplank. The main deck was empty, scattered with debris. He made his way down to the cargo hold. The smell hit him first. Even after 3 months, the scent of confinement, of unwashed bodies, fear, and sickness clung to the wood. The hold had been modified. Rough wooden partitions had been erected to create cells, not passenger cabins, cells. Halloway walked through the gloom holding a lantern. There were chains bolted to the bulkheads. This wasn't a transport configuration. This was a floating prison. In the corner of one cell, he found a scrap of fabric caught on a nail, a piece of a woman's headscarf, yellow calico, and scratched into the wood of the wall, barely visible in the lantern light, were marks, tally marks. 7 days, then the marks stopped. Halloway needed a witness. The harbormaster's log listed the Kestrel's pilot as a man named Tobias Finch. Finch had been discharged from service in September and was living in a boarding house near the waterfront. Halloway found him in a tavern that evening, a man with a beard stained by tobacco and hands that shook when he wasn't holding a glass. "Tobias Finch?" Halloway asked, sitting opposite him. Finch looked up bleary-eyed. "Who's asking?" "Captain Halloway, Inspector General's office. I want to talk about the Kestrel and the cargo you carried from Cypress Grove in August." Finch's glass hit the table with a clatter. "I don't talk about that. I signed a paper. Colonel Bragg made me sign." "Colonel Bragg isn't here," Halloway said, leaning in. "But I am, and I have a file that lists 19 people as unrecoverable evidence. I need to know why they couldn't be recovered." Finch stared at him, fear warring with the need to unburden himself. "They weren't lost, Captain," he whispered. "They were discarded." Halloway felt a chill go through him. "Explain." "Bragg brought them on board, 19 of them. Men, women, a couple of children. He was convinced old man Valker had buried gold bullion and told his house slaves where it was. Bragg interrogated them. For 3 days we sat anchored in the channel. I could hear the screaming coming up from the hold." Finch took a long drink, his hand trembling violently. "Did they talk?" Halloway asked. "They didn't know anything, that was the truth of it. Valker hadn't told them a damn thing, but Bragg wouldn't believe it. He kept pushing, and then—" Finch paused, wiping his mouth. "Then the fever started, Yellow Jack. It broke out in the hold. One of them must have been carrying it. In that heat in those cells, it spread like fire. So they died of fever. Some did, maybe 5 or 6, but Bragg, he panicked. If he brought a ship full of yellow fever victims into New Orleans, he'd be quarantined. The inquiry would start. People would ask why he had civilians in chains, why he was torturing contrabands. What did he do, Finch?" Finch looked down at the table. "He ordered us to seal the hold, batten down the hatches, nailed them shut. With the people inside. The living and the dead, all of them. He told us to tow the Kestrel to the salvage yard. Said the cargo was hazardous contagion and evidence of Confederate biological sabotage. He made up a story that the rebels had infected these people on purpose to plague the city. He labeled them evidence so no one would touch them, so no doctor would go down there to treat them." Halloway sat frozen. "He left them to die in the dark." "He did worse than that, Captain. He ordered the ship scuttled in the mud flats, then changed his mind and just left it to rot. He marked the file unrecoverable because he knew by the time anyone looked, the heat and the rats would have done the work. There wouldn't be any evidence left to recover, just bones." Halloway left the tavern and walked to the river. The lights of New Orleans reflected on the water, shimmering and distorted. He thought of the 19 names. Little Sam, age 6. He had been locked in a dark hold, listening to his family die, while a Union colonel wrote him off as an administrative inconvenience. The next morning, Halloway marched into the office of General Banks, the commander of the department. He laid the file on the desk. He laid his transcript of Finch's testimony beside it. "Colonel Bragg murdered 19 civilians," Halloway stated. "He tortured them for gold he never found, and then he sealed them in a plague ship to cover his tracks. I want him arrested." General Banks picked up the file. He read the unrecoverable evidence stamp. He looked at Halloway with tired, pragmatic eyes. "Captain, do you know how much cotton Colonel Bragg has secured for the Treasury in the last month?" "It doesn't matter," Halloway said. "It matters to Washington. It matters to the war effort. We are fighting a rebellion, Halloway. Sometimes in the fog of war, things are lost. These were people, General, freed people, under our protection." "They were evidence," Banks said, tapping the file. "According to this, they were evidence of a Confederate plot that tragically couldn't be preserved. That is the official record." "It's a lie." "It's a necessary categorization." Banks opened a drawer and dropped the file inside. "Colonel Bragg is being transferred to Washington to advise on logistics. He is leaving the department. The Kestrel is scheduled for demolition next week. The wood is rotting. It's a health hazard." "You're burying it," Halloway said, his voice rising. "I am winning a war," Banks replied coolly. "You are an auditor, Captain. You found a discrepancy. I have resolved it. The items are unrecoverable. Close the ledger." Halloway stood there, realizing the immense, crushing weight of the machine he was part of. The Union was fighting for freedom, yes, but it was also fighting for power, for cotton, for control. And in the gears of that machine, 19 lives were nothing more than friction to be smoothed away. Halloway returned to his office. He sat at his desk for a long time. He could not arrest Bragg. He could not save the 19. The Kestrel would be broken apart, the bones swept into the river, the evidence truly unrecoverable. But he had the names. He took a fresh sheet of paper. He dipped his pen in the ink, and he began to write, not a government form, not a ledger entry, a narrative. November 15th, 1863. Personal record of Captain Julian Halloway regarding the 19 souls taken from Cypress Grove. I record this so that the ink does not dry on their memory as it has on their lives. He listed them: Isaac, who worked the soil; Delia, who sewed the linens; Thomas, who drove the cart; Rose, little Sam. He wrote down what Finch had told him. He wrote down Bragg's name. He wrote down the general's refusal. He folded the paper, sealed it in an envelope addressed to his brother in Ohio, a lawyer with abolitionist sympathies. "Keep this," he wrote on the outside. "Do not open until I am dead or this war is over." Colonel Thaddeus Bragg ended the war a wealthy man. He entered politics in New York, a celebrated veteran of the Gulf Campaign. He died in his bed in 1889, respected and eulogized. The Kestrel was broken up for scrap in December 1863. The workers found bones in the hold, mingled with the chains. They were told it was Confederate prison transport debris. The bones were tossed into the Mississippi, drifting down to the Gulf of Mexico, joining the thousands of others the river had claimed. But Halloway's letter survived. It sat in an attic in Cincinnati for 40 years. In 1905, Halloway's nephew found it. He didn't publish it. The world had moved on, and Jim Crow America had no interest in the tragedies of Reconstruction. But he donated it to a historical society, cataloged as Civil War Correspondence Miscellaneous. It wasn't until 1994 that a researcher, digging through the mundane paperwork of the Union occupation, found Form 44B in the National Archives, the red stamp still vivid, unrecoverable evidence. She connected it to the Halloway letter in Ohio. She pieced together the timeline, the seizure, the disappearance, the cover-up. For 130 years, the 19 people from Cypress Grove had been listed as items in a government file. Evidence that was lost. Now they are recognized as victims of a war crime committed not by the enemy, but by their liberators. There is no monument to them in Plaquemines Parish. The site of Cypress Grove is now an oil refinery. The spot where the Kestrel rotted is a concrete dock. But the names remain: Isaac, Delia, Thomas, Rose, Sam. They were not evidence. They were people. And though the system tried to make them unrecoverable, the truth has a way of rising to the surface, like driftwood in a swollen river, waiting for someone to pull it from the water and red the scars. History is written by the victors, they say, but sometimes the victors leave receipts, and if you know where to look, those receipts tell a story that no amount of red ink can redact. What do you think of Captain Halloway's choice? Should he have risked court-martial to expose Bragg then and there? Or did he do the only thing he could by preserving the record? Let us know your thoughts in the comments. If you found this story compelling, hit the like button and share it. There are more files in the archives, more stamps marked unrecoverable, and we intend to open them all. See you in the next video.